All right.
Okay.
Yeah, so why don't we start with how you guys met?
How we met. Well, why don't you want to talk about how we met, or do you want me to talk about it?
I can tell. I was in the military at Fort Myers, and how I got there is I had been delaying my military obligation.
It was during the Vietnam War.
Right. So I volunteered for the military, for the Army, and I had just gone to a Full Gospel Businessmen's meeting and heard a pastor speak that so convinced me that I need to hear him again. And he was from the East Coast, New Jersey, or one of those states like it. And so I prayed to the Lord that somehow get me there. So after basic training at Fort Leonard Wood, then I went to Fort Gordon, and from there, because I graduated at the top of my class, they told me you can pick where you want to go, either to the White House or the Pentagon or to Turkey, and I chose the Pentagon. And when I got there, it was the day after Kennedy had been shot. So everything was just dead silent. You know, it was really, I've never experienced anything like that. But from there, I started going to, because I had a Presbyterian background, I started going to the Presbyterian church there and really liked it. But I had relatives that were connected with the Assemblies of God, and there was an Assemblies of God church in Washington, D.C. And my mode of travel was walking, but from Fort Myers, where I was stationed, was not that far to either one of those places, a couple hours. So I went to the Assembly of God Church there, Christ Church, and really liked it. Florence and she went there also. We said hi, or nothing more than that. But then the Full Gospel Businessmen's meeting they had one, and I don't know what the time lapse was, a few months. And I'm at this meeting, and in the interim, I had been praying that to go to Calgary, Canada, after I got out of the service. I just had a bee in my bonnet to do that. And I got the newspaper and whatnot, and so I'm at this Full Gospel Businessmen's meeting at the Shoreham Hotel, and there's a lady from that very same city, Calgary, at the table. Beautiful looking woman, and I thought, the Lord just set this up. But she didn't want anything to do with me. And I thought, Lord, you're trying to tell me something. And during the break, I'm walking to the back of the auditorium, and I spot Florence. And I thought, what is Florence doing here at a Full Gospel Businessmen's meeting? I was very, very intrigued. So I asked if I could sit with her when the break was over, which he allowed me to do. And
And he followed me everywhere I went, even sat outside the bathroom door. Okay.
right. So I don't know. Our first date, I think, was ice skating. And, I had brought my skates with me because, I was really into ice skating. And you could, that reflector pond in front of the Lincoln Memorial would freeze over and you could skate there. Or in our case, there was another hotel really close by, and I don't remember the name of the hotel, but they had an indoor ice rink there. And I asked Florence if she would go skating with me, which she said yes.
Yes.
And
But I didn't skate very well on ice.
no, but that didn't matter to me. So she lived quite a ways away, but I was bound and determined to see her several times when I could. And the bus fare was like only a dime, but there were times when I didn't have a dime. I remember one time walking, and it was the wee hours of the morning. I made it almost the way. I got within about probably 5 blocks of where I needed to go, and I just collapsed. But I got back before anybody knew that I was gone, whatnot. It was it what November we started seeing each other, and I think it was in, I don't know if it was February or May, when I asked her if she would marry me, and she said yes.
How long was that after the first date?
Not very long.
I think about 6 months.
Oh, in the meantime, once he asked me to marry him, and I said yes, my mother knew nothing about his background. She didn't know, and because no one was around the D.C. area that was familiar with his background. So she hired a private investigator to check him out. She gave me the full report that he was satisfactory, that he came from a good family, he had a high IQ, morally he seemed to be a very upright man, all that. But when I told her I was going to marry him initially, before she had him investigated, when I told her, I'm going to get married to Bob, where I told him, yes, I'd marry him, she passed out. Luckily, she was standing by the bed because she fell flat on the bed. And I said, do you like him? Are you upset that I'm going to marry him? And she goes, no, I really like him. But she said it just shocked me. So.
My goodness.
The Pentagon, investigated Grandpa. Can you explain what the Pentagon did to investigate you to make sure you got the clearance to be able to work at the Pentagon? How did they investigate you?
They sent people to where I grew up. They sent a military person, and they interviewed a lot of my close friends, because they've then told me later that we had an officer come here and ask all kinds of questions about your background and whatnot. Went all through that, and then I had to go through a polygraph because I worked in the Special Security Detachment, 210 of the B Ring. Still remember that. That's what it took to get where I was.
What was your security clearance?
It was I couldn't tell anybody at the time. It was all crypto. It was the highest security clearance you could possibly have. So I could go anywhere in the Pentagon, because of that badge. And I would, go there. My barracks wasn't that far from the Pentagon, so I would go there in the evening and go down in the basement and pray. And then Robert McNamara, Secretary of Defense, I said, I'm just going to go up and see what his office looks like. So I did that one night and just walked right into his office, looked around, and then walked back on out. And so,
Did you stand behind his desk?
yeah, I did.
So, take me back to like that first day that you guys like met each other. You said he followed you to the bathroom.
Well, that wasn't when we met. This is when we were at the hotel. We had met at
that's
church.
where I first saw her. She went straight to the bathroom. Well, I just said, I'm going to wait there until she comes out to let her know I'm here.
How did you propose to her?
I was in a DuPont Park on a bridge. So,
And he got down on his knee.
so yeah. And she won't even go to that park. It's not safe area in DC anymore. So I'd say, let's go back there. And she won't.
Well, one of the things that's sort of interesting is he said, I haven't picked out a ring for you, and we're going on such and such a day to pick out a ring. And he said, you better get what you want the first time. He says, because I don't intend to buy another one. Remember that?
I don't.
Yeah. So I picked out a big one.
There you go.
Go, Grandma.
So why did you marry Grandpa? What made you think this is the guy I want to spend the rest of my life with?
Well, this is part of what I was going to read at the very end, but I'll read the first paragraph now, okay? When I was a teenager, my father passed away. I prayed, and when I was growing up in the church I was growing up, if a person came, a fellow came, and a father had a girl that was of marriageable age, like my best friend, her name was Ruth. And if a young man came that her dad thought might be a good prospect, they would invite, the father would invite the young man over to the house for lunch after church. That was just what they did. And my father had passed away, so I had no father, to invite him over, or any guy over for that matter. So I'll read the first couple of paragraphs. When I was a teenager, my father passed away. I prayed and asked God to help me find a good husband. To help God along, I made a list of 10 attributes I wanted in a husband: born again, well-educated, and a gentleman, a man with integrity, etc. I reminded God frequently about my concern in this area and mentioned my list. When I was 19, during the month of September, in Northwest Washington, D.C., I was introduced to Bob Frankhauser. In the first few minutes of conversation, I learned that he met several of my qualifications. In February, we started dating. He was in the military and didn't have much money, but we had fun. We enjoyed the activities available in the D.C. area, participated in church functions, and took long walks. He was so wonderful. I was in love. I thank God for this blessing. And I'll finish reading
I made
that
a list
later.
of 10 too, and she, put God first, and then her second, and she had, I don't remember all 10, but I know she filled all 10 of them.
That's awesome. We love that.
Do you guys remember anything from your wedding day?
Well, his parents didn't meet me until about 2 days before the wedding.
Right. Yeah, because they're in Minnesota. And she knew nothing about Minnesota.
And this is where we went for our honeymoon.
Well, anyway, there were very, very few blacks in Minnesota when I was growing up. And I went to a basketball game at the University of Minnesota. And I had to sit up in the way in the bleachers. My parents had, assigned seats, but I didn't. So, and I got to sit, I was probably only 10 years old. I got to sit next to a black boy, and I just, we just clicked. And so I had no bad feelings about black people whatsoever. And, I probably told my parents I'm going to marry a black woman because, I don't know what led me to say that. But so when I was in the military and I said, I'm dating this girl and she's dark because...
You said she's short and dark because my hair was black at the time.
And they just implied that I was dating a black person. And so they were pretty shocked when they came to the wedding. They did not.
Well, it was 2 days before the wedding.
Yeah. It was a total shock to them.
When I walked in, I thought they didn't like me because I walked in and they looked absolutely shocked. Their mouths were open and, they were just totally shocked. And I'm thinking, this is not good. They do not like me. But they did. And I didn't find out until quite a while later that that's what they were thinking, And they would have been all right with whatever, but they were just shocked because they had this preconceived idea in their head of what I was going to look like.
What did Grandma's family think of Grandpa when the extended family on the wedding day and such? Were they pretty fond of him?
My grandfather loved him.
And I loved her grandfather. We hit it off really. That was one of my 10 was that they had to have a background. Not only did she have to have the love of the Lord, but her mother did. I wanted to marry into a really solid Christian family and not just one generation. And when I found out that her grandmother was even a preacher, and her grandfather would hand out tracts, and he was a real on fire Christian, to say the least. You don't see many people like he was. I mean, I liked him a whole lot, and I liked her mother a whole lot. And one of the things, they had all kinds of these mother-in-law jokes, and I just didn't want to have any problems like that. And knowing her mother, I knew I was never going to have a problem like that.
What did you like about her mother?
I just liked the way she did things, her attitude. It wasn't her looks or anything like that. It was just who she was. She just a person I could really admire.
She had a very gentle spirit. She was very much like your mom. Very much like your mom.
Didn't Grandpa spend his first full paycheck giving it to the church when you first got married? Can you explain what the story was when you were first married?
I can't remember that one right now.
Well, I was so thankful for that the Lord saved me, first of all. That's another story.
Grandpa has always been a giver.
I was so fed up with my life while I was in the military. I wanted to find the Lord, and that's why I went out to the East Coast in the first place, because when I went in, I had asked the Lord into my heart at age 8, age 15, but I could never stay. I'd last for about 3 months, and then I'd fall back into my old ways. And I had relatives that had the baptism in the Holy Spirit. And I thought, that's what I need. If I don't get that, so I made I took leave from the military and I went back. My parents were attending Souls Harbor at that time, which is much like an Assembly of God church. And I said to the Lord, you've got to meet me on this certain night or it's all over. I'm just going to commit suicide. And when I got there, my brother wanted to go up to the camp. It was right around July 4th or something. Yeah, it was. Because it was July 5th when I went to that church. And it was an evening service, and they had a guest speaker. And at the end of his message, he says, there's somebody in this audience that I see in a coffin if he doesn't give his life to the Lord. And
Tonight.
yeah, and my heart just started beating 1,000 times a minute. And it was just like I could see Jesus over on my right-hand side. I mean, I was so moved. And I thought, Lord, you answered my... And so I went forward and gave my life to the Lord. And I knew that I would never, ever be the same. It was 2 days later, I went with my brother to the camp that they had. And we weren't signed up to go, but Brian Rudd was the speaker and Charlie Gay was with him. And Brian Rudd is another story. His parents, he was a very young, he must have been in his early 20s. His parents were in the ministry, and he ran from the Lord, and he wound up in prison, and the Lord met him in prison. He gave his life to the Lord, and so he was really an on-fire person. And that it was at the end of that meeting that Charlie Gay prayed with me to receive the baptism in the Holy Spirit, and I started speaking in tongues, and when I got up, the place was empty. And we didn't have a place to stay. My brother and I slept in a chicken coop that night. And when I woke up, it must have been like between 4 and 5 in the morning, and I woke up speaking in tongues, and I had never, ever, the feeling was so awesome, so overwhelming. I thought, I will never go back into sin again. And when I got back to the military, I had a group of guys that I ran around with meet me at the airport. And the first thing they said, before I said anything, what happened to you? So I told them what happened. Well, when I got back, they had a meeting in the barracks, and they just they couldn't accept it. They just, you'll be back with us.
Well, they sort of drank and stuff like that, too, Did things that weren't appropriate that we don't do.
Yeah.
So then you were so on fire for the Lord that when you were first married, you gave your whole paycheck
Right.
to the church. What did Grandma say when you did that?
She was not, Florence was not a happy camper. She she was working for in the federal government at that time, and so she wanted to, quit work and raise a family, but.
This was later on. This wasn't the first paycheck. We didn't start raising a family for
Right.
quite a little while afterwards,
But
at least over a year.
no, so I gave quite a bit away for quite a while.
Still does.
When did you start working at Dakota Electric?
That would have been 1979, April 9th, 1979. So
you worked at the Pentagon, and then what happened? And then you weren't working at the Pentagon anymore. Where did you go?
He worked for an oil company
Energy Oil Company.
doing accounting, because that's what his degree was in.
And then from there, I went and worked for Wilson Van Meter, who was a large home builder in Washington, D.C. And I stayed there about 3 years. I just felt that, that wasn't, it was a fun time in my life, but I didn't think it was, to be permanent. So I went to work for I went to school to learn computer. It was just, the computers were just coming out, just at that point. And so I went to, after that, I got a job with IBM, but, I should have probably gone into the language part of it rather than the hardware part of it. And having no background in the hardware part of it, it just, we went up to Poughkeepsie, New York. That's where I had the training with IBM, and it just didn't work out. And so I knew that, I could fall back and work for my uncle, who had a large turkey farm in Cannon Falls, Minnesota. And so that's what we did. We put our house up for sale and sold it in 9 hours. And at a good profit. And I don't know if we knew that IBM was going to build really close to that area at that time or not, but it was an investor that bought it because he could see what was going to happen.
And you managed at the turkey farm for...
Right. I was there until 1975, full-time. And then I thought I would go into business with ServiceMaster. So I went through their school. But I had a job lined up in Florida. But the key was I had to sell my house, and my house in Cannon Falls would not sell. Then I went to work for Hayes Contractors down in Minneapolis from 75 to 79. My father, in the interim, had been on the board of Minnesota Valley. He got that position because...
And that's an electrical co-op, like Dakota Electric.
He got that position because the guy that was on the board was killed in a farm accident, and they asked him to replace him, and he said he would. Well, they liked him so well, he was there for 30 years.
Because he kept getting elected, because that's an elected position.
And so Oscar Sutherland was the president of Dakota Electric, and my father and him were very good friends. And it was that connection that got me the job at Dakota Electric. The guy that I couldn't get the job right away because the guy that they were trying to get rid of took him to court, and the court case lasted a whole year. And then Dakota Electric won the court case, and so then I was it was free for me to come and work there in payroll. And so that's,
You had a supervisor job there too for several years.
I did budgeting. I did a lot of things there. It was a really fun place to work.
And now Carlos works there.
Where does Grandma work?
Where did I work? I worked for the federal government in D.C. for about 4 or 5 years. And then when we moved to Minnesota, I didn't work very much. I did a few part-time things, but not much, until the girls were going to go to college. And so I needed more income. So I worked for the Dakota County Extension Office. And I worked half days in the summer. And then in the winter, I worked 2 days one week and 3 days the next. So it was half time. And I worked with a Hmong project that was in Farmington, where the Hmong in Minnesota were all on welfare. And they were trying to get them to be gainfully employed. And most of them had been farm workers in Laos and the areas where they came from. So they set up a project here in Farmington. So basically, I kept the books for the Hmong project. I helped them, taught them how to write checks, how to do budgets, to run the farm. And so that's what I did and that was under the umbrella of the Dakota County Extension Office, which was under the umbrella of the University of Minnesota. And then after that, I decided that project fizzled out after several years, because it was in maybe about 4 or 5 years, because it was in competition with the local farmers. And so the Hmong were getting their land free and all their seeds free, and then they would undersell the local farmers. So they couldn't continue with the project because there was controversy there. So then I needed another job, and also when I was working for the university in the winter months when they weren't farming in this area, and I would have to be at the University of Minnesota in St. Paul, and the roads get quite bad in the winter. And I was almost in a few accidents because it was like it's about an hour drive in there. And so I was wanting something close to home. So there was a job available at the Air Traffic Control Center in Farmington. And it was an entry-level clerical position. But it was within walking distance of the house. And so that's where I started, at the entry-level clerical position, lowest paid job in the place. And then when I left, I was a human resource specialist. I had worked my way up. What are you thinking, Rex Pex?
When I started running.
It was in Cannon Falls.
No, I mean, I was probably either 16 or 17 years old.
Oh, in high school.
Yeah. I never joined the cross-country team until I was a senior. What prompted me, I don't remember, other than I had energy to burn, and I just, I couldn't wear myself out at that age. And that's probably what prompted me to join the cross-country team. And I liked it so well that then I went on the cross-country in college at Westmar. Then I didn't run until I was about 40 years old, and a guy that I was working with said, you can start running, and we talked about running a marathon and whatnot, and I had never done anything. What happened was that David Gormley, who was a freshman when I was a senior, we could run about equally at that time, But he went on to, in college, he was running 15 miles a day training for the Olympics. So he was that good. But then from a race that he was coming back from in New Mexico, he fell asleep at the wheel in Denver and hit a tree, and that ended his life. So that was a sad, sad moment in my life because we were really good friends in high school. So I was probably relating that to this guy I was working with, and he said, "Well, you could do the same." And so, but I'd already hurt my back arm wrestling with my brother. But I, started running anyway, and then eventually I did, 5Ks and whatnot, and then I knew that I wanted to run a marathon, so at age 49, I finally ran Grandma's Marathon. And thanks to Florence, I was able to finish because I was ready to die out about the 20-mile mark, and she was on the sideline about there, and she started running, and that she never ran. So that so motivated me that
So you only had about 5 miles left to go, or 3 miles left to go.
so that really charged me up to finish the race.
Oh, about arm wrestling with his brother. His brother weighed about 100 more pounds than he did. And they were in their 20s. And they were arm wrestling.
I think I was 33 at that time.
No, you were in your 20s. And the arm wrestling, and you were determined that no way he was going to beat you. And he tried so hard, he moved his,
He didn't get my arm down, but he popped my back.
yeah, he didn't get his arm down, but he popped his back because he was not going to let his brother beat him.
Yeah.
It's called pride.
Here, I could hear it snap. It was the dumb thing. So it was probably 33 when I playing tennis,
In D.C.
and I did a backflip and came down on my wrist and broke my wrist. And I think that was at age 33.
Yeah, I think that was 33. And the back was in the 20s, late 20s.
Man.
When did you start bird watching? Did you have a love for birds just from working on the turkey farm, or when did you really get into bird watching?
That started when we moved to 9244 Russell in Bloomington.
How old were you?
We moved there when I was going into 8th grade, I think. Yeah, 8th grade, and there was the 9 Mile Creek was only 3 blocks from my house, and it was a great place for watching birds. And then we also had a pond behind our house, which was filled with ducks and whatnot. So between the two of them, I would just the birds near the river really intrigued me, and I guess that's where it all started.
What kinds of birds were there?
There was like a whippoorwill, and whether there were any kingfishers, I'm not sure, but just the kind of birds that I didn't have a bird book immediately at that point, but I then went out and bought a bird book. I remember when I was a senior, I would go by France Avenue, which was just a gravel road, and there were swamps on both sides at that point. And I was out there watching birds, and Gary Mertz from our high school threw a cigarette, and it just burst into flames, and the whole swamp was aflame. I just ran to get out of there as fast. So my bird book got burned up. So obviously I was watching birds at that point. So, and then my grandparents lived up at Detroit Lakes and on 80 acres, and they had all kinds of birds. Even they had a pond where there was even a loon back. So I would just go out with binoculars and just spend a lot of time just seeing how many different birds I could see. So I don't know, there wasn't anybody else that prompted me to do that. I just a love for wildlife.
Yeah, tell me about kind of your habit here. What do you do each day?
Well, I have about 10, 12 feeders out there. Almost all of them have sunflower seeds in them because that's the favorite seed for birds. And so on any given day, I probably see 10 different kinds: blue jays, purple finch, or the house finch, the goldfinch. There's the downy woodpecker, the hairy woodpecker, the red-bellied woodpecker. We've got mourning doves.
You've seen the pileated also.
Yeah, occasionally. So right now we've seen a lot of Baltimore Orioles, and I've got a couple of rose-breasted grosbeaks.
And cardinals.
Yeah, and we've got a house wren right in our arbor area. And they're just amazing birds to watch their habits and what they can do. We watched the hummingbirds.
Like that, big.
The hummingbirds can fly forwards, backwards, you name it, they can do it. And so it's just amazing. I never get tired of watching them.
Do you have a favorite bird?
Well, I don't get to see the kingfisher once every couple of years. I love to see that bird because the way it dives into the water to get its food.
One of the things that we have, but they don't eat at the feeders, are eagles. They fly up and down the river, up above looking for birds. And we also have great blue herons that come out in the summer. You see them for a couple of weeks. They're out there. And hawks, which we do not appreciate because they take out the bunnies.
Can I ask, you worked on the turkey farm. Can you tell me about working on the turkey farm, who owned the turkey farm, what happened to the turkey farm, like where is it today?
Well, my uncle owned the turkey farm. That's an amazing story how he, I think he had a poultry major in college, and my father and my father and my uncle went to college together, and so they started, my dad was a feed salesman, but Dale Peterson, my uncle, who's my mother's brother, he owned the farm, but how he got that farm, there was I think he was a banker that he told him, he'd like to raise turkeys, but he didn't have any money. And the banker just said, well, I'll give you the money to buy the land and you can start buy the turkeys and start raising them. He just convinced, he was convinced that Dale would do the job. And so it was a very successful deal for both of them. I mean, my uncle finally probably became a millionaire.
Multimillionaire.
Maybe. I don't know for sure, but he became the president of the Turkey Association for the state of Minnesota. I mean, he was way up there and knew everybody, and he had raised about 50,000 turkeys a year. And I worked for him in the summer when I was in 11th grade, and I loved it so much that, I thought, well, maybe someday I'll work there for full-time or whatnot. And so after we were married for a while, and what Debbie was about 3, I decided it was time to move back to Minnesota. And Florence says, well, you've got to get a job where you make at least $10,000 a year, which was a lot of money back then. And I thought, well, the only place I can do that is working for my uncle. And so that he let me do that. He put me on a bonus situation. If you can get these laying hens, and there were about 3,000 of them, and we had to gather the eggs every day, several times each day. He based it on how many eggs were produced. Well, I'd get up at 3:30 in the morning when the lights came on at 4, and the big problem with turkeys is that they want to just lay on the eggs permanently. They don't want to move around. Well, they call it a broody. And so we had broody pens, and we'd mark with chalk. And if they were nests all the way around each pen, and each pen probably had more than 500 birds in it. And there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, about 7 pens or something like that. So I would get up and make sure that, there weren't any birds that staying on the nest overnight and whatnot. And so lo and behold, we were soon getting 1,000 more eggs a day than he had ever gotten before. And he was just amazed. And so he finally said, I can't, we got to stop this bonus program. You're just, I was making more than people with a doctor's degree. So he finally, he stopped that. He told somebody he's the best turkey manager in the whole state. So then 1974 came along, and that was a year. In 73, they had built so many laying hens in the state that the price of eggs just tumbled. And he said, I could have made more money if I had just not raised any birds. I mean, he took a huge loss that
And
year.
paid everybody's salary besides.
Yeah, because of that, I decided, it's time to, his son was in college at St. Olaf at the time, and I figured, he's going to take over anyway. So I chose to leave, and I was going to go to a service master and work my own, have my own business with them, but then I could never sell my house. So then I went and worked for Hayes Contractors downtown Minneapolis. I'd set up where the they had 6 divisions. They had sewer and water, they had plumbing, they had electric, you name it. They built a lot of the things at the University of Minnesota and wherever. They were that big, but it was after in '79 there. Then my father got me into Dakota Electric, and where you'd have a pension and whatnot, and which I didn't have at Hayes Contractors. So I opted to go with Dakota Electric, and then I stayed there until I retired.
So where did you grow up?
Where did I grow up? I basically grew up in Bloomington. I was born in Fargo, then we went to Worthington,
Minnesota.
and that was for until I was 2 or 3, and then we went to Detroit Lakes until I was 6, and then we moved to Bloomington. And so I started first grade in Bloomington and graduated from Bloomington.
Do you have any siblings?
Yeah, I have a brother a year younger, and another brother 7 years younger, and a sister 3 years younger.
Obviously, you guys spent a long time in Bloomington. Tell me about some of the stuff that you and your siblings did together growing up.
Well, our first place, we had probably at least a quarter of an acre, if it wasn't a half acre. And my dad had a big garden there. And besides that, we had enough land, so I got a horse when I was in 3rd grade. I also had 2 paper routes. I remember having to go out and deliver papers when it was so cold that my legs would just be numb when I get back. But then my father taught me to raise rabbits, and we had a big hutch back there, and I had at one point and you could sell rabbits into the store without all the federal regulations that you've got today. I could just say, hey, would you buy my rabbits? And they would say yes, and that would be it.
And they would be rabbits to eat, right?
Yes. And my father taught me how to dress them out and do everything. So I was really going to go into that big business. But then a neighbor kid came and opened up all of our cages, and we had a Dalmatian at that point that went and killed all the rabbits. And that put me out of business. And the horse that I bought, I went out in the pasture one day, and something went wrong with the horse, and he turned around and kicked me in the rear. I couldn't walk for 2 days. I had to crawl to the house. And then we'd play a lot of football in the backyard and whatnot. And one of our players, Milt Sunday, actually went and played for the Vikings eventually. He played for the University of Minnesota and then for the Vikings. And he did the shot put when he was in high school, and he might have broken all the records. I mean, he was the smallest of he had 2 siblings, both of them over 300 pounds, and they were all muscle. They were just amazing people. So it was a fun time. We had a lot of great players. Our football team, was one of the best in the state. And
You were in the Boy Scouts, too.
yeah, I started in Cub Scouts, probably about age 10. And then I advanced all the way up through the Explorers. So I was in Boy Scouts all through school and beyond school, because we went to the National Jamboree. We went to Valley Forge. We went to way out east and saw all the big sites out east. We went to New Mexico and camped in the mountains, took a burro up into the mountains and camped. So it was really, and my father was a Boy Scout leader, so it was really fun having him with me almost all of this time. I mean, I don't know where it was, but somewhere in Minnesota we were camping, and one of the scout leaders actually wound up with a bear in his tent, black bears. So it was, and then we went somewhere where we were diving off cliffs into the water that's like 18 feet off the. I did it once, and I came so close to hitting the rocks on the shore that I said, "That's it. I'm not doing it." But we had others that did it a lot more. It was a lot of fun.
Were you ever an Eagle Scout?
No, I had no desire. That was a whole lot of work to be an Eagle Scout. But we did things downtown with a lot of other Boy Scout groups. I mean, they'd rent an auditorium down there, and we'd dress up in Indian costumes and whatnot. My high school friend Bob Ford, his dad Luther Ford, was the head of the whole Scout organization for Minnesota, and we got to go a lot of places because we had really good leaders.
He and Bob Ford are still good friends.
Yeah, we'd go up to Minnie Point Scout Camp. I don't know if we went up to 2 or 3 years, and that's mega area of, and we'd camp out for a week or two, and then when I was college age, I took a group of the Scouts up there with another high school friend, and so we were actually in charge of them. And so that was really a good experience, being responsible for a whole group of kids. And then when I went to Valley Forge, I went there as a leader, so I was in charge of another group of kids under me.
And what about you? Where did you grow up?
I was born in Washington, D.C., and we moved to Crewe, Virginia when I was 7. And that is in southern Virginia near the North Carolina border. And my father was a pastor of a Methodist church in Crewe, Virginia. And I had, some great experiences in Crewe, Virginia. And then we moved back to D.C. when I was 7. And then I spent the rest of my life until I moved to Minnesota in Washington, D.C.
Gotcha. And how many siblings do you have?
Well, I was an only child. My parents were older. My mom was 35 when she got married, and my father was, he must have been 45 or 46. And he died when I was 15 at the age of 60.
So you like to bob in the ocean. When did you first go to the ocean? Do you remember?
Well, you see, I first started out at Deal Beach, which is an inlet of the Chesapeake Bay.
At what age?
Oh, from the time I was little. My mother had this cottage on the Chesapeake Bay, and that tells about it in here. So from the time I was just an infant, I was in boats and playing in the water in the Chesapeake Bay. As a matter of fact, I like the water so much. My grandfather had a nickname for all of his grandchildren and his children, which is sort of funny, but he just liked nicknames. And he always called me Duck because I like to swim a lot. My cousin. I didn't have many cousins. We're a very small family. He called her Lidl because she was little. So he called her Lidl. I mean, that's the way he was, you know. And so I love the water. I've always loved the water.
Was there certain types of foods that you like to eat in DC? Were you fond of like the seafood, clams and oysters and stuff like that?
I love fried oysters. I enjoyed crab. My mother loved eels. And you know what eels look like? They're, look like a snake. And she would chop them and fry them. And they stunk so badly when she fried them, I did not like them. But crabs I loved. And I like to catch crabs. And I liked oysters. And I like fish.
What was the weather like in DC? Was it pretty rainy or what was the weather like?
Hot and humid in the summer. We had no air. And it was very hot and humid in the summer. And in the winters, it would get down below freezing, but not stay down there. It would be freezing, maybe not all winter. We'd have snow, but it would be gone within a day or two. So it didn't last.
Was it a big shock to come to Minnesota weather, or how did you handle that?
Oh, it was a terrible shock to come to Minnesota weather. As a matter of fact, I think it snowed for days on end when we first moved to Minnesota. I mean, it just snowed and snowed and snowed. And I really wasn't fond of Minnesota.
And when we were married September 24th, and so when we came to Minnesota
For a honeymoon.
for the honeymoon and traveled all around the state, it just rained almost every day. And I've never seen salamanders, frogs on the road like never ever again.
They were covering the road, salamanders one day. Another day, frogs, worms. I mean, but it would go in like one day this and another day that. It was terrible. So I was not a fan. And then when we moved here, I'm used to DC, and there's always something going on. There's a concert you can go to, and a lot of stuff was free. Free concerts, free museums.
Yeah, we went to a lot of concerts.
Yeah, and we moved to Cannon Falls, Minnesota, which was small town, and we had lots of grocery stores. All the stores, they stayed open till 9 o'clock at night. And Cannon Falls, everything closed down at 5. So if you ran out of milk, you waited till the next day. I mean, that was unheard of, in D.C. The store wasn't far away, you just drive to the store. So it was a real change. And at the time, that small town of Cannon Falls was very cliquey. If you hadn't been there all your life, then you were an outsider and you were treated like an outsider, as I was. But then I made lots of friends there and,
What was your strategy for making friends when you came to Minnesota?
Well, when I came to Minnesota, when we first arrived in Minnesota, we went to church with his parents, which is in downtown Minneapolis. And we'd drive down there every Sunday, which was over an hour drive. Then we'd go to their house for lunch, and then we'd drive back home, back to Cannon Falls. So that was our thing when we first moved. Then we started going to a small church in Northfield. And then we made a lot of church friends. But then there was a newcomers group of ladies in Cannon Falls that I hooked up with. They were new moms and new people that were there because obviously there were people moving in my age that weren't fitting in. And so anyway, I got in with them, and we had a good time, and they made we made lots of connections that way. And so when Debbie was in kindergarten, no, maybe it's a little older than that, maybe it was first grade, I decided to run for the school board. And I was told, oh, you're an outsider. You cannot win an election for the school board. You know, you just can't do it. But I felt that that is something that God wanted me to do. So I ran for the school board. I was interviewed by...
She went door to door.
I went door to door. And I also had to speak at forums. You know how they have forums. And I spoke at the forums. And number one, I had 2 strikes against me. Number one, I was an outsider. And no one from the outside that wasn't born and raised in Cannon Falls was ever elected to the school board. You don't even try. And number 2, I was a woman. And they hadn't had a woman on the school board. And they said, there's no way. Well, I won the school board election with more votes than anybody had ever received. No man had ever gotten more votes for the school board than I did. And I was interviewed by the Minneapolis Tribune, and there was a big article in the paper on me when we were talking about Title IX and women's sports, because at that time, there were no women's sports. There were all kinds of sports for guys, but there were no women's sports. So when I was pushing that, and and Title IX passed, but they still didn't have women's sports. So what's your problem? Why aren't you having these sports? And so finally, they started having women's sports in Cannon Falls, and that's what it was. Got lots of interviews in the paper, and
She wound up being on the board for 9 years, and she had held every position that that's available. And I'd come home from work, and she'd be on the phone talking, and she'd be on that phone. People were asking her questions about the school for 2 hours nonstop every night. It's just the way life was then.
Did you enjoy it?
I did. I did enjoy it. I did enjoy some of it. When I was the president of the school board, or the chairperson, I shouldn't say president, the chairperson of the school board, I was the one that had to conduct the meetings according to Robert's Rules of Order. And there would be people that would come in who would be very angry about an issue or a teacher or a principal, and they would bring their groups of people in and yell and scream, and that part wasn't fun. It's always fun when people agree with you and are happy with you, but it's not always fun to deal with the anger and the yelling and that sort of thing. But it was okay. I think most people were satisfied.
What made you want to run for the school board in the first place?
I don't know. I felt like it was what God wanted me to do. I thought it would be maybe a platform where I could, be a witness.
Her kids were getting a good education.
And yeah, I wanted that also. And I think that they did get a good education while they were there. Didn't you think so? Mm-hmm. There was a big difference when we moved to Farmington than when we were in Cannon Falls in that school district. I had no clue. I just figured most school districts were like Cannon Falls. We moved to Farmington, and it was totally different. Very, a lot of more drinking, a lot more sassing of teachers. There was a lot more parental support for discipline. Not always. I mean, there was a kid that threw up on the principal's desk because he was drunk in Cannon Falls. And one of his parents happened to be on the school board. And she said that he had just had the flu where it wasn't that because he smelled of alcohol. So there were issues that would come up in Cannon Falls, but not to the extent as far as Farmington. Farmington was known for its, and I didn't know it at the time when we moved here, for its not being, it's being more of a party type school.
Take us back to when you guys were beginning your family. Tell us about the birth of everyone and growing up with them, parenting them, all that stuff.
First of all, I didn't want kids. I had too much fighting with my brother, and I said, I just don't want any part of it. It wasn't fun.
Well, he and the next sibling down would always fight. Tell him about breaking the window.
Yeah, just another. We get into one of our fights, and I think it was a Ready Whip can or something. He threw at me, and I ducked, and it went through the picture window. And my father was home, and he came into the room, and that's the only time I've ever hit my father. I hit my father, knocked him down. And my mother was in the kitchen. She said, "You need to pray." And I was so convicted of what I had done that, I never, ever did anything like that ever again. I was so upset with myself for doing that. I was just wasn't thinking, obviously.
But he himself was a very good father. He had 3 girls, and when he would come home from work, they would all hang on his leg like ticks, and he would walk into the house with 3 little girls hanging onto his legs.
Didn't
Yep.
you?
And when she said, "Well, we're going to have kids," well, I said, "Then they're all going to be girls." I don't want any boys, because all we did was fight, and I didn't want anything to do with that.
Oh man.
And you got all girls.
Yeah.
How were you feeling when you guys found out you were pregnant?
We were very happy.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, we were happy. But she was a fussy one. She was
We had gone through all kinds of training how to raise a kid and how to, so we were pretty well prepared, I think.
except for the lack of sleep, because she cried all night. And I was driving down. I had gone to see my aunt, and I was driving down a busy street in D.C. and I was coming down a hill. I fell asleep at the wheel. Knocked over a sign, hit a tree, put a great gouge in the tree. Got out of the car because Debbie was on the floor in the back seat because they didn't have these nice child seats like they have these days. And she was sound asleep on the floor. She was in a seat, but, it was sitting on the floor in the back, and she's sound asleep. And I looked at her, and normally I love those kids like you wouldn't believe, but I was so angry that she was still asleep. Here I knocked over a sign, ran into a tree, hit it bang like that, and she never woke up. But that was Debbie. She cried a lot, but then she was an interesting one. She was very busy all the time. I said to the doctor, I said, "I'm not getting any sleep." And he says, she'll be like that the rest of her life. He says, "Just wait till she gets a teenager. You'll never get sleep." So anyway, she wasn't one that needed a lot of sleep.
No, and then the doctor, Peter Cummings was the doctor, and he said, "You have a very, very intelligent child," which made me very happy.
But you couldn't put anything together in front of her. Like, I told him, I said, "Don't put that baby carriage," because, little girls have baby carriage. I said, "Don't put that put her together in front of her, because she'll take it apart." And sure enough, he put this the carriage together in front of her, and she took it all apart and lost the parts.
Wasn't it true that Debbie was a really fast reader when she was a kid?
Oh yeah, and by the time she was in third grade, I could not keep up with her. We'd go through a book, or Dad, when are you going to turn the page?
She started reading before she went to school.
Oh, wow.
I read to her a lot, taught her to read. So she learned how to read before she went to school. But when she was in, I don't know, maybe second or third grade, they had parents. It was mainly mothers that came in, and to sit in the class and you can observe, and every child was going to read. And I am so proud because I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, oh, I know she reads so well and all this kind of stuff. And so she started to read, but she doesn't read all the little words. She only reads like Jane ran field. And, like it would be Jane ran across the field or whatever. And all the parents were looking, around like, what is with this kid? She does not know how to read, but it was the way she would read, and she would know, she could almost tell you what everything it said and the meaning, and she would get the whole, and she was like that through college. She's a very, very fast reader.
Yeah, we tried to convince her to become a lawyer, and then that didn't work. Then we tried to convince her to be a dentist. That didn't work. Well, she was in her first year of college, and I don't remember what was she majoring in. But I was at Dakota Electric at that time, and I had just taken a class in communications, and I told Debbie, hey, why don't you try going into communications? Well, it clicked with her, so when she graduated, her major was in communications.
When she was little, we had birthday parties for her, and if somebody would give her a book for her birthday, while all the kids were playing, she'd be sitting on the floor reading the book. I mean, she just loved books. She still does. And then Pam, when she was born, she had bright red hair and a red face, and she loved animals, but she was very feisty, right?
Still is.
I'll give you an example. There was a kid on the bus that
Yeah, you don't mess with Pam.
would pull off all the buttons off of Angela's coat. Or they would steal her hat. It was a boy. And she got mad at this boy, and she sat on him and pounded him like you wouldn't believe, which I was on the school board at the time. So I get a call that she had, messed around with this boy and was hitting him and all this kind of stuff. And she was doing it because he had, pulled the buttons off of Angela's coat. So anyway, but she was very protective of Angela, but she also liked to be the boss of Angela. So there was some rub there with the two of them.
What did Grandpa, your mom and dad, think when you had your kids? When Debbie was born and such? What did they think? Did they help you out with their kids and such?
Well, they, when we went to take a time off or something for something, they would, we could leave them with Grandpa and Grandma.
Grandpa and Grandma were wonderful. I didn't want to say that Pam was bad. She wasn't a bad child at all. She was just, she was pretty obedient as a little kid, don't you think? She's obedient. She's good, but she wasn't going to let anybody.
Until she became a teenager.
Yes, but she was really good as a kid, except she wasn't going to let anybody hurt anybody. But when we lived in D.C. until Debbie was 2, we moved out when she was, she turned 2 in May, and we moved out in the fall. And when we lived there, my mother was she would take care of Debbie when, like we went up with his brother to Philadelphia. She would take care of Debbie then. And she always wanted to be taking care of Debbie whenever she could. So she's very supportive. As a children, then when we moved to Minnesota, about a year after we moved, she moved to Florida. And she would come up every summer and stay a month. And if we wanted to go on a trip, if we wanted to do anything, she would take care of the children while we went. And she was very interactive with the children. And his parents, until they got to be about 8 or 9, once a month, his parents would take them for the weekend. Or if we wanted to be gone, if he had a business trip, say, to wherever, his parents would take care of them while we went. But they would take care of the children once a month. And when his parents took care of them, they were very sweet. They had a lot of animals. And they had a lot of sweets, a lot of candy. And it would take until about the next month to get them back in line after spending the weekend with Grandma and Grandpa.
Grandpa, what were your parents like? It sounds like they loved to spoil your kids, but what were they like when you were growing up?
I thought that I had the greatest parents that you could possibly have. I felt that, that I was, my parents were king and queen almost. They, anything they did, I didn't have any objections to. I knew if I got spanked, and I got spanked a lot, but I had it coming. That's why I say I was, this is another story. I locked myself into the bathroom while my brother kicked the door down to try to get at me. I mean, he was a year younger, but he was bigger than I was. And when my dad came home, we really got it, and we deserved to get it. So I just had the greatest respect for my parents, and my dad, did so many things with me, teaching me gardening, teaching me how to raise the animals, and then setting me up to sell produce at the grocery store. And then he got me that horse that turned out to be a flop, but it wasn't his fault. And
rats?
Yeah, he worked for Archer Daniels, and so they had a place where they would experiment with various rats and whatnot for, disease control or whatnot. And so he'd bring home a white rat, and so I got to have a white rat in the house more than once, and I even got to train it so it would come to the table with me.
I can't believe your mother let it sit up to the table. Honestly, she was a pretty neat lady.
Yeah, my parents, they were both on the school board. They were high up in the church. I had such respect for them. The community had such respect for them. My mother was the first secretary Bloomington ever had. So when I was in high school, she started working as a secretary for the city of Bloomington. And so I was, and not only that, she was very, very beautiful. I thought, well, I've got the most beautiful mother of anybody. I really believed that. And so I was super proud of my parents.
Did you guys get to the birth of Angela?
No, we
Yeah,
didn't.
yeah.
Angela was born, and she was very different. All of the girls were very different. One had, when Debbie was little, she had blonde hair, almost white. Pam had this bright red hair, and Angela had black hair.
That's how she got her name, Angela. I wanted to name her Gail, and Florence had a dream, and she said black hair. I said, well, if she has black hair, you can call her Angela. Forget the Gail. You know, Brian Rudd's wife's was named Gail, and that's why I wanted to name her Gail.
And I didn't like the name Gail. And I had this dream that Angela had black hair. And because the other two girls had different color hair, I decided,
She not only had a little of it, she had a whole lot of it.
yes, a lot of black hair. So I was really happy. I was praying that that dream would come to fruition. And I'm still glad that her name is Angela. She is too.
Yeah, she lives up to her name. Her middle name is Joy, Angela Joy, angelic joy. That she was born laughing, and almost every time I talk to her on the phone, she's laughing. She's just got that. It's a
I'm
gift.
glad that she was not born first. I don't know what I would have done with the other two in their personalities, because I would have thought something was definitely wrong, because she was so easy. She was, she was sweet, she was obedient. I mean, she was just easy. Whereas the other two were running all over the place, getting into everything. I mean, the other two were just very, very active, more so. I mean, there was nothing wrong with Angela. She liked to read. She did well in school. But she had a more calm personality. So, which after the other two was very welcome, right?
Well, I didn't have any problems when they were young with any of them.
No, I didn't either when they were young. But I mean, she was like the other two would. If we went anywhere where there was a fountain, like in a mall where there's a fountain, Pam would try to jump into the fountain. Even if she's 5, she'd try to jump into the fountain. Debbie was, when she was like 3 or 4, she wasn't 4, she's probably about 3. We were in a department store and she was hiding. I'm trying to hold on. I was trying to hold on to Pam. And Debbie's hiding in amongst the racks of clothes. I lose her. I'm screaming, Debbie, Debbie, Debbie. And where is this child? And your heart thinks, oh, somebody stole her and whatever. And you see, I didn't have those issues with Ange. So that was sort of nice.
Pam was always making things, and she was very, very creative as far as the dolls that she was working with or whatnot.
Yes, one time we caught a mouse. She skinned the mouse, scraped all the whatever blood off of it, and made a coat for her Barbie doll out of mouse fur.
And she loved working with flowers. She was out by the river collecting flowers all the time.
Yeah, she very, very, from the little bitty, she was very, very artistic. I mean, the mouse coat she made was very lovely. I mean, it was nice. But she was a mischief. She knew I was afraid of mice. And one day, somebody caught a mouse, and she hung it by the tail on a string so that when I opened my closet door, it was right even with my nose. About scared me out of my wits, because you aren't expecting a mouse to hang right here. But.
And she was in Girl Scouts, and so when the Girl Scouts had their sold their cookies and whatnot, I mean, she was a great salesman from the time she was 8 years old. And she sold a lot of cookies.
But she was sometimes naughty. We had all these rabbits. We had 3 female rabbits, one of which was very old. And we had 1 male rabbit. And we said to the girls, they begged for these rabbits. So we said, you can have these rabbits, but under no circumstance do you put this rabbit right here in with these rabbits. No way, no how, ever. Well, one day I came out and there was a baby rabbit. And then we ended up with 32 or 33 little rabbits from these 3. And I said, who put this rabbit in with these rabbits? And, you know, of course, the 3 of them stand looking at you like, you know. Finally, Pam says, I did it. And I said, well, why did you do that? We told you not to do that. She said, I was teaching Angela the facts of life. We couldn't keep them. We didn't know what to do with them. So my father-in-law says to me, I will trade you rabbits for Gopher basketball tickets. I said, go for it. So we traded rabbits, baby rabbits, for Gopher basketball tickets. And so we enjoyed basketball. One day we were at my father-in-law's house, and we were eating, and he says to the girls, how do you like that meat? And they said, oh, yeah, it's good, good. He says, oh, those are your bunnies. I could have wrung his neck.
You said that you had a dream about Angela and the color of her hair. And you've had a lot of dreams throughout your life about things happening. Can you tell me a few of them and then end with Omi, the dream you had about Omi?
I don't even, you should have asked me this before. I can't remember right off the top of my
Alright,
head.
well tell me the dream about Omi.
Okay, but when they were in the adoption process, I had a dream that Omi had a pumpkin head. Her head was like not long, you know, like some people's, you look at him and his head is not round, his head is more long, you know, oblong. I just saw her from the back, but her head was round. And there was another child that came up for adoption. And I thought, she's going to have a pumpkin. I called it a pumpkin head because, you know, pumpkins are round. And I said, and so I told Angela, and I told people, I'm sure this baby's going to have a pumpkin head. And they found a baby, and the first baby they found, they offered to Joel and Angela that had a certain condition that wherever you, if it rubbed its skin, it would bleed or get a sore, and that sore would never heal. The more it rubbed, the worse it would get. And there was no way that, there was no medicine, there was no treatment for that. And they lived in Jonesboro, so they wouldn't have been able to put her in a car seat because of the rubbing. Well, Angela, she has a very soft heart. She didn't want to say no to a baby. And yet she says, I don't know how we could do this because we live in Jonesboro, and if you can't put her in a car seat to take her anywhere, you know, how am I going to do this? I just don't think I can. Well, then we saw pictures of her, and she did not have a round head. She had a oblong head. I said, Ange, I don't think she's the one. I said, because she doesn't have a pumpkin head. Both Angela and Joel felt, especially Angela, she didn't want to turn any child away. But she didn't know how she would be able to handle Rachel Ann and Abby with that kind of a hand. Like if she were to go like that, she would and it would never heal. It was a very rare condition. As a matter of fact, several years later, that child was still up for adoption. But you'd almost need 24 our care for her. So anyway, it was a few months later, Omi came up. And I saw the back of Omi's head, and Omi's head shaped like a pumpkin. So Angela said, I think, I really believe that this is a child. And sure enough, Omi's head it's more round than. So that's the story of Omi and Angela and Joel and the girls. And that's who God wanted her to have. I wanted to show you how I'd like to end this whole session. This I wrote after I retired, but it was shortly after I retired. Okay? And it was 1965 to the present. These are the best days of my life, it's entitled. When I was a teenager, my father passed away. I prayed and asked God to help me find a good husband. To help God along, I made a list of 10 attributes. I wanted a husband born again, well-educated, kind and gentle, a man with integrity, etc. I reminded God frequently about my concern in this area and mentioned my list. When I was 19, during the month of September in Northwest Washington, D.C., I was introduced to Bob Frankhauser. In the first few minutes of conversation, I learned that he met several of my qualifications. In February, we started dating. He was in the military and didn't have much money, but we had fun. We enjoyed the activities available in the D.C. area, participated in church functions, and took many long walks. He was so wonderful. I was in love. I thank God for this blessing. I thought that life couldn't get better than this. These were the best days of my life. In September of that year, we were married, only a year after we had met. There were a few bumps in the road, but we were in love. We were happy. I thank God for this blessing. I thought that life couldn't get better than this. These are truly the best days of my life. A couple of years later, our first daughter, Debbie, was born. We thought that God didn't make babies any better than Debbie. She was the cutest, smartest, funniest child ever born. In a few years, we were blessed with Pam and then Angela. We were delighted and amazed at God's continued blessings and creativity. Bob was a very kind and loving father who cherished his daughters. I thank God for these blessings. I thought that life couldn't get better than this. These are truly the best days of my life. From the baby and toddler years, we moved into childhood years. Somewhere in that time frame, we also moved to Cannon Falls, Minnesota. Bob showed a lot of courage and strength. He lovingly disciplined his precious daughters. Our family was a happy family, very involved in the community and with the church. Often while looking at our house on a snow-covered hill, I thank God for his blessings. Again, I thought life couldn't get better than this. These are the best days of my life. Then came teenage years, the years of extremes. Bob and I were either the most wonderful parents in the whole world or an absolute embarrassment. According to the girls, we made them follow rules that no other teenager ever had to follow. Our house was full of activity. Parties, sleepovers, and friends. We went from one phone in the house to 6. Bob lost his hair, and I turned gray. The brown now comes from a bottle, and now it's blonde. But these were rewarding days. The girls were turning into fine young ladies. Bob showed both patience and endurance during this time. I thanked God for these blessings. I thought that life couldn't get better than this. These were okay years. The next phase of life was college, marriages, and depleted savings accounts. There were 2 girls in private colleges at the same time over a 6-year period. Bob and I spent many evenings praying, juggling the figures and our budget so that each daughter could complete her schooling. It was an exciting time, a fun time. Our daughters were becoming our good friends. We were entering a new and wonderful relationship with them. We were also adding their husbands to our family circle. Again, I thank God for these blessings. I thought that life couldn't get better than this. These are the best days of my life. Now we sit in our den, Bob in his chair, and I in mine. We watch the Gopher basketball games and the Olympics. He reads Forbes magazine, and I read Martha Stewart. I look over at him. I think about my list so long ago. I thank God life just can't get better than these. These are truly the best days of my life. Thank you, Bob, and I love you.
Father, we thank you for how you've blessed our family. Debbie and Pam and Angela, Debbie's children, Joshua and Joel and Jesse, and how you've led them, guided them and directed them. We thank you for Pam and her boys, Isaac and Micah, Victor and Reuben and Carlos, because of the adoption, the choices that you've given them. We just thank you for their ability to use their giftings, and we just continue to pray that you will guide and direct their future days and continue to bless them and encourage them and watch over them and keep them and continue to bless them and direct their days. We thank you for Angela and her girls, for Rachel Ann and Abby and Omi. And we just thank you for the blessings that they've been not only to their parents, but to us. And we just pray that you'd continue to use them for we thank you for the minds they have, the brilliant intelligence that they have. And we just pray that you continue to use that and mold them in the way that you want to do it. And we just pray you watch over Omi and continue to heal her many body parts. We thank you for the miracles you've already accomplished in her life. And we pray that you continue to work miracles in her behalf. And we thank you for Angela and Joel. And we just pray that you'd heal their bodies, heal their relationship with Clark, and we just pray that good things will continue to happen in their lives. We pray that you'd bless them and keep them, watch over them all the days of their lives. We ask these things in Jesus' name, amen.
Dear Jesus, I just pray that you would be with each family unit. I pray that you would be with Debbie and Nathan. I pray that you would be with Joshua, Lord. I pray that you would be with Joel and Sharon, Jolito and Joanne, that you would be with Jesse and Rebecca, Lord. I pray that you would bless them. I pray that you would bless the marriages, Lord. I pray that you would bless the great-grandchildren and the grandchildren. Lord, I pray that they would have a love for you, that they would serve you all the days of their lives, and that you would bless everything that they put their hands to. Encourage them, uplift them, and let them be strong pillars for you, Lord. I pray, Lord, that you would be with Pam. I pray that you would be with Victor, with Reuben, with Carlos, with Isaac, with Micah, Lord. I pray that you would bless each and every one of them. Lord, I pray that they would use their talents and abilities for you. I pray that you would keep them in the hollow of your hand and bless them. Bless everything they put their hands to. I pray that you would give them great joy in their life and that they would all be very, very successful. But most of all, Lord, that they would serve you. I pray, Lord, that you would be with Joel and Angela, that you would bless their marriage, Lord. Bless it in every way. I pray that you would be with Rachel Ann and Michael, that you would bless their marriage. I pray that you would be with Abby and with Omi, that you would bless them also. I pray that you would bless this family unit with love and joy and peace beyond measure. I pray that you would bless everything they put their hands to. Keep them for yourself, Lord. Let them be strong in you. I pray that they would do great and mighty things for your kingdom. Lord, I pray for all of our children, their spouses, our grandchildren and their spouses, and those spouses that aren't yet into the family yet. I pray that you would keep them for yourself, Lord. I pray that you would bless the marriages, bless them with great love and respect for each other. Bless them with a strong faith in you, Lord, and that they would be strong, and that when one is weak, the other one would be strong, and vice versa, Lord, that they would walk in your precepts, that you would provide good spouses for those who are not married as yet, that they would find the person that you created especially for them, and that their marriages would be strong and their life would be the life that you would have them to live. And if you choose that some of them may not get married, Lord, I pray that you would bless them and bless every aspect of their life. I pray that you would give each and every one of them wisdom and knowledge and understanding, and that they would walk in your precepts all the days of their lives. I ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. And now I'd like to play a song. And this song is our prayer for our family.
Journey of the narrow road, and those who've gone before us line the way, cheering on the faithful, encouraging the weary, their lives a stirring testament to God's sustaining by so great a cloud of witnesses. Let us run the race not only for prize, but as those who've gone before us. Let us leave to those behind us the heritage of faithfulness passed on through godly love. May the fire of our
Boy, I normally don't cry about things. Oh, excuse me. That's it. Now you know what's important. But I think you knew before anyway, right?